Hello again, this is John, and today I'm going to rewire a sewing machine. Well, actually I'm going to install a foot control on a sewing machine that has two plugs like this. Normally a sewing machine that has a couple of cords with plugs on them, it would get hooked up to a controller that has one of these blocks on it that has a motor outlet and a light outlet. But I want to show that you can get a sewing machine that doesn't come with a foot control, that just has a couple of plugs on it, and then you can pick up one of these foot controls from Goodwill. I picked this one up for $1.99, and it's got a typical 3-prong plug on it. Well, you can cut the plug off and wire it up to these two cords to make this work with this. So that's what I'll be showing you today. Okay, let's start talking about the plug. Plugs these days they're a polarized plug, so they have a wide blade and a narrow blade. And the same with the outlet, a wide side and a narrow side. The wide side is the neutral and the narrow side is the hot. And so if you took a voltmeter and put it between the wide terminal and ground, you would have no voltage. But if you put it between the narrow terminal and ground, that's where your 120 volts comes from. So the narrow side is the hot side. The wide side has no voltage, but it's the neutral, and so it's the return line. So then on this plug, when you plug it into a polarized plug, this side has power on it all the time, and this wide side has no power on it until you actually flip a switch on whatever this is plugged into. So this completes the circuit back to the switch box in your house. So I've drawn up this little diagram, and we have the two cords coming out of the motor, and we have the one cord coming from the wall. This plug is here. We have the motor control here, and we have a light switch here that's in the machine. So the two cords, what we want for a polarized plug, if it's a non-polarized plug it doesn't really matter because you can plug it in both directions. But it would make sense to wire this up so the hot side goes to the light switch first, and the side of the motor control, so the power stops in the motor control. If we hooked it up, the hot to the other side of the light switch, it would go in, the power would go into the motor, or into the sewing machine, and over to the bulb socket on the light, and then it actually would go through the light and make it all the way back to here before it stopped having power. So that's why it's preferable to have the hot side hooked to the switch first and this side of the motor control first. That way you don't have power running through the machine before they get to the control points. That's what we're going to try to do here. So actually the next step is to actually start cutting plugs off. I'll grab a pair of wire cutters. Now this plug has one of these cords goes to the controller and one goes to the wall outlet. And so we'll just clip those off. And we'll do the same with these. Now, if you have extra wire, like this blue one on this machine is at least 6 inches longer than the other one, so I'm going to cut them both the same length. so they'll both come out to the same point when I rewire them. Next thing I do is I cut the two wires apart a little bit, and pull them apart 1 or 2 inches to give me a little room to work. So we have those two, and now we do the same with the motor control cords. Split them apart a little ways to give a little room to work. And then we'll take some wire strippers and strip about 1/4 inch off each wire. Alright, the next thing to do is to take our polarized plug and figure out which line is the neutral side. And we've got writing on the hot side, so we follow that all the way to the other end, and here's the writing. So this one's hot, this one is neutral. Next thing we need to do is figure out which one of these cords is the light cord and which is the motor cord. So we can just, probably would have been smart to figure that out before I pulled the plugs on them. But we can take the two ends, plug them into our power source, and the motor's not running, so okay, this one now we've figured out is the light. So the blue one is the light, black one obviously must be the motor. So we'll just quickly give that a try by taking the two ends and carefully putting them in. Yep, so there's the power for the motor. Alright, one end of our power cord will go to one side of the motor, and one side of our power cord will go to one side of the light. So those three will get soldered together. I'll just mock it up really quickly here. And now the other side, the hot side of our cord, goes to one side of the light, and the other, well, I should say the motor control now has two wires. One side goes to the motor and one side will go to the hot side of our power cord. So we can just twist those together quickly, hook these two up just to get an idea if everything's going to work. and we keep everything separated. Take our power cord, plug it in. Now we have power exposed on this terminal right here, because this is the hot side. Neutral side has no power on it. So don't touch anything. But now we can try the light switch. That works. And we can try the motor control to see if it controls the motor. And you can see it does. Okay, we have our wiring all set now. We'll unplug that so we don't get a shock. And now we're ready to, we'll slide on some shrink tubing on the ends of these things and get them fixed up a little better and get them soldered. Next thing I want to do is to check the light cord, the blue one, to see which side goes to the switch and which side goes directly to the socket. And so there's no power. The sewing machine's unplugged, so there's no power anywhere in the machine. And so I put one probe in the socket, the light socket, and one on one of the wires, and there we have continuity. So this wire has continuity to the socket all the time. This wire will have continuity to the socket only when the light switch is on. So the switch cuts the power to this side of the blue wire. And I don't know if you can read the mirror or read the meter, but the meter is showing continuity now, and it's open now. So this side is the side we want hooked up to the hot side of the plug, so we don't have power going to the light socket whenever the machine is plugged in. Now the hot also goes to the motor control first. The neutral side of the power cord goes to one side of the motor, and the neutral side goes to one side of the light switch, or the light socket. That way when the power cord is plugged in, we have power going to this wire, and it goes to the motor control first. And when the motor control has no pressure on it, the power stops inside here. It doesn't go through up to the motor first. If we had all these wires switched around, power would go over to the light socket, and so if I plugged it in and I didn't have a light bulb in the socket, I could potentially get a shock if I put my finger in there. Not that I'd do that, but so that's why I don't want to have the hot side go to the socket first. And if I put the motor wire to the hot side first, we'd have, whenever we plugged the power cord in, we would have power going to the motor, and then the other side of the motor would go to essentially the switching unit for the motor. So you'd have power all the way through the motor and all the way over to the foot control. So the way I'm doing it, I have power go to the foot control first, and it stops there until I actually push down on it. And I have power going to the light switch, and it stops there until I actually push the button to turn it on. That's why I'm doing it this way. One thing I like to do is buy shrink tubing in various sizes. You can get this at places like Harbor Freight, I'm sure. Hardware stores probably carry it, maybe Walmart, I don't know. But this comes in a lot of different sizes, and one of the first things I do is I take the two cords from the sewing machine and I put a short piece of shrink tubing at a couple of spots, which will just hold these two cords together from the point that I splice up to the machine, which just makes it a little neater. When we start connecting the wires up, one thing you have to keep in mind is you need to put shrink tubing over things before they get soldered. So first thing, as I pointed out earlier, I put a couple of pieces over these two wires. I also put a couple of pieces over these two wires. And now the first solder joint I'll make is the hot from the power cord going to the line for the switch for the light. And the other side of the hot then goes out the other cord over to the power, the motor control. So that one I'll solder first. Okay, I've got my handy 260 watt soldering gun here, which is way too much for this, but it's the only soldering iron I have. And I have some rosin flux and some rosin cord solder. So we will dab a little bit of flux onto here. And start things going. Okay, there's our first solder joint, and now it's going to, this will help hold things together for when we're doing our other soldering jobs. And this small piece of shrink tubing will now go over here, and I'm not going to do that yet because I want to get everything soldered together and hooked up to make sure that it all works. So the next piece that we have to go on is figure out which wire is what here. Okay, that's the motor control. So that's the motor control, that's the motor control. So this side of the motor control now goes to one side of the motor. And so that'll only be a single wire on each side. The first one we did was two wires on one side going to one wire on the other side, so I needed a fairly large piece of shrink tubing. But this is just a one wire on each side, so I can use a smaller piece of shrink, or a smaller diameter shrink tubing. And I think I can use this white one. Yes, that goes over the top of there. So we got a piece of that. Put it over one end here and twist those together. Put a little rosin on there to clean things up when we start soldering. to go. So now this one we have 2 wires on this side and 1 wire on this side. And so I'll need probably a piece of this larger stuff to go over all of that. So I'll slide that on there. And I try to get everything lined up so it's laying properly when everything is all said and done. Those 2 wires are going to be there, and those 2 wires are going to be there. So that looks pretty good. Wind all those together. Put a little rosin on there. And hit it with a soldering gun. Don't know why my lights don't work. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. Alright. We are all soldered up. Let me put the light bulb back in and see if we got everything hooked up right. So, make sure everything is separated. Take our plug and plug it in, making sure nothing's touching. Okay, the light works. And let's see if this works. And it does. And one thing nice about these newer controllers is they're all electronic inside, so they just have a little circuit board in there instead of the old style that had resistors to control the speed of the motor. The old resistors, they would get hot if you ran them very slow. The whole foot control would get hot. But these new ones are so much more efficient because they have just a little circuit board in there. So everything appears to be hooked up properly. We'll unplug that to take the power away, and then we will do all the shrink tubing. So we line it all up over the top of our connections. Plug in our heat gun. We just happen to have right here. And take one last quick look to make sure everything's okay. And we blast away. There you have it. Now everything's safe, everything's concealed, all the connections are made, and now we just do the kind of the cosmetic thing of getting everything to look nice. So I like to try to make everything lay flat against each other, and then we can heat shrink these two together. Alright, that part's done. And now the only thing left is to do our final pieces here. I have one short piece. I wanted to put two. This first one will be kind of a strain relief for all four of the wires together. I need to twist everything to make it lay flat. So this first one will go kind of just at this end. And then this large one goes over the top of everything. I've done a few of these before, so I know that it takes a little bit of planning to make sure that you have enough shrink tubing to go over the top of everything else underneath. And there we have it. A nice modern motor control on a nice vintage Morse sewing machine. Get everything cleared out of here so we can see everything as it should be. So now we can plug it in. Light works. And we'll take our little $1.99 sticker off of here. So, that's how to install a modern motor control onto a vintage sewing machine. And this thing even does zigzag. Pretty cool. Well, there you go. Here's the end product, nicely encased in several layers of shrink tubing, so there's no safety issues anywhere. It's all soldered. It'll never come apart. This will last many, many years. Thank you for watching.